How's it going, everyone? In today's video we're going to be diving into the signature sound of Sidney Charles, looking at his track TripAdvisor. Sidney's been a key player in the house music scene for years, always pushing the boundaries of this genre while maintaining that deep groove heavy energy to his tracks. TripAdvisor is the perfect example of this, blending classic minimal house elements with garage inspired Reese bass lines and old school drum textures. If you love stripped back house with a retro twist, then you're gonna enjoy this one. Let's get into it.
Rhythm, snare,
The first thing we're going to talk about is going to be the vocals. With this track, he's kind of opted more for a stripped back approach, basically relying on vocal textures and ad-libs to add a bit more to his track. So the first thing we've got is these vocal textures. You've basically got this texture syllable, which is pretty much playing throughout the track. Then what we've got is a nice 90s inspired vocal phrase. There's kind of two approaches with these phrases. One of them, which I suspect Sidney might have done, is recording an original one, or to go into the 90s packs and various sources where you can find a lot of these really nice vocal SFX and textures. So I'll not show the packs because I want to encourage you to dig, but if you go into those 90s sample libraries, there's a few that have some pretty nice vocals in them. Kind of like that. We'll see if we can find some more examples. This one. So essentially what I believe he's done is he's found one of those phrases and he's created this rising effect by basically taking a syllable within that sample. And basically all I've done here is I've used an auto filter to gradually build it up. And then I've taken this sung vocal. So that's the first example I had, and then the second one, which I think was a bit better, was this. What I've essentially done is I've taken a phrase that sounds like this, but I've shortened it and then looped it. And then what I've done for this last bit is I've basically played around with stretching the vocal, using different bits of it. The style of this track is very garage inspired, so doing things like stretching vocals or repitching vocals can be something else you try. The cool trick that you can do in Ableton is literally just holding shift and dragging the sample to stretch it. We'll just see what it sounds like in the mix.
rhythm, snare,
The only other thing he's got is two ad-libs.
Let me take you on the rhythm, snare,
Like I've kind of touched on before with ad-libs, I'd basically just be looking for spoken word phrases. I've done a vocal tutorial covering where you can find these, and it covers a lot of the popular sources, but you can also get creative. So sticking with the trip journey-like theme that he's gone for, I've just got this.
Enjoy this trip.
Just a simple ad-lib there, and on the ad-lib theme, we've got this other one.
rhythm, snare,
I think this one works really well because of the lyrics, as well as the fact that this element is pretty much the only one playing at this point in the arrangement, so it gives it more impact when the bass comes in.
rhythm, snare,
The only other thing I'll say about this is he's got this tail with the sample. What I'd expect this tail is basically just a delay, but something else you could do is basically just take that bass ad-lib and duplicate it, but gradually bring the volumes down. It basically creates a cleaner sound as opposed to the delay where you don't really have control of the tail unless you resample it. The next place we'll move on to is the crunchy drums. So what I've got here is basically this really punchy 909 sample. Essentially what I'd do if I wanted to replicate this sample was basically to load a 909 sample and basically play around with giving it a decent amount of saturation distortion to basically create this really hard-hitting style of kick. With the pattern, it's pretty standard. All you've really got is the 4/4 plus a few builds. The way the pattern works is essentially playing the 4 notes, moving down to 8th notes, and then playing this groovy 16th note pattern. And the interesting thing that we've done here is we've automated the frequency. So we've basically got the frequency starting at around 278 and then gradually bringing in more of the highs. We've got this snare layer where the snare plays off the beat. And the only other thing it's doing here is this fill, which is a very interesting way to do a fill. You've basically got a snare on every main beat, but then you've got these ones that are a bit off the grid, which creates this rhythm which seems a bit unpredictable. We've got this fill, which is essentially single snare plus a reverse kick. I always like having these reverse elements just because it gives the kick a bit more impact. It basically sucks you in. Got this hat. We've got this ride. We've got this crash, nothing overly complicated here, a 909 with a bit of delay on it. Got this perk. This basically just sounds like a rim shot, which is playing off that other snare. It sounds like a very erratic rhythm, but it's almost playing this accompanying role with the snare. As you'll see, they're very closely aligned together, but slightly off grid, which creates this really groovy rhythm. And then the very last thing is just this top rack. There's a few different things going on here. We've got this hat, which is playing on the beat. It's something I don't actually do as much as I should, but it's basically a layering trick where you can layer a really nice high-end texture with the kick to give the kick a bit more definition. So I could have the kick like this, but I could introduce this subtle percussive layer that sits occasionally with the kick. We had this closed hat, we had this open hat, we had the snare on the 2 and the 4 that we were missing earlier, and then we've just filled the gaps with some percussion and the rim shot on the offbeat. So we've ended up with a very swingy, garage-inspired rhythm, and a lot of the sounds are of course garage-influenced. I've not really touched on processing because it hasn't been too important, but we've used this multi-band compression preset, and the only other thing we've got is this auto filter, which is basically filtering down to gradually reduce the intensity. If you're looking to temporarily take away energy from your mix, then filtering drums can be one of the best ways to do that. The only other thing I'll mention is the processing. What we've got on the drum chain itself is we've got this glue compressor, got saturation on the bit warmer preset. I find this is a nice preset just to add a nice level of warmth to the sound. What we've also got is this parallel saturation chain where we've basically just combined the dry signal with another instance of a bit warmer just to really give it that fatness. The next group we'll look at is probably one of the elements that makes this track for me, which is the bass. What you've got here is 2 basses. One is this garage-inspired Reese bass, and then you've got this stabby texture, which we'll cover shortly. The first layer sounds like this. What we'll start with is the sound. The way I've created this is essentially just using a basic saw wave, but we've pitched it down 2 octaves. We've added unison, which is going to create this really large sound. There's a bit of detune on that, we've added this filter just to tail off some of the highs with a bit of a resonance boost and a decent amount of drive. And then we've more or less kept the envelope as is, so it's sustaining the note. As you can hear, it's quite a raw sound, and there's quite a few things going on with this processing chain, which is hoping to put it into that space and make it really dirty. The first thing we've got is a sidechain. We've got this erosion, which has basically been used to add this artificial noise to the sound. We've used this utility to essentially put the bass in mono. Got an EQ. What we've essentially got here is we've got this dip around 114, basically to create this separation between kick and bass. Got this filter, which is basically filtering down to just the sub. Got this overdrive, essentially adding some harmonics back to the sound once you filter it. We've got this erosion again, which this time's adding a sine texture to the sound. And then you've just got this wacky EQ, which is giving it a further bass boost and getting really detailed in terms of the area regions it's cleaning up. With the pattern, we've got two variations. One of them is the main drop, which looks like this. And then the only other thing to mention is just going to be this variation of pattern. Essentially what he's done here is he's basically created a variation of that first pattern, and he's teasing the sound that's coming in. It's a very useful arrangement trick which you can use to build anticipation. The second bass we have is this acidy resonant stab. How I did this sound was essentially two saw waves, both playing 2 octaves down. One of them's playing a 7th, which is creating that 5th chord style effect we've looked at before. And I think the majority of the makeup of this sound is in the filter. So what we've essentially got here is the cutoff quite low, but resonance cranked right up. Then we've just used this envelope to control the cutoff, and it's basically sweeping through those really nice high frequencies. So we're basically going for a sound with a very acid style character, which we can basically just use as a nice texture to sit on top. The very last section we'll get into is going to be the synths. The first sound we've got is this acid lead. The way I've done this is essentially just a saw with a bit of unison, detuned. Got the filter, once again, paying attention to the resonance. The envelope looks like that, and we've got a bit of movement on the cutoff. So nothing overly fancy with the sound, and the only other thing I'll say is with the patterns, we've basically got a call and response pattern going on where you basically start with the question and you answer it within the same layer. The next few layers are basically just used in the breakdown to temporarily add something where the energy's been stripped. So you've got this pad. The way we've done this is we've essentially taken two basic waveforms. The first one is going to be that saw wave. We've added unison and detuned it. We've layered it with a sine, also been detuned. We've applied a very subtle filter with a resonance boost. We've applied a few effects, mainly reverb, EQ, and some of these hyper and dimension effects. We've also got some frequency automation going on just to create this evolving feel. You'll see it's a bit more precise here. So that is basically the pad. The chord layer here is mainly being introduced when the main break occurs, just to add a bit of depth to the sound. It's basically just a saw wave once again, unison and nothing else. With the effects, you've got different variations of modulation effects, EQ with a bit of a roll off, and all you've really got here is some automation to bring it in, and reverb and flange once again. And then the only other thing we've got is just a standard sustained string. So yeah guys, that's going to wrap up this one. By now you should have a better understanding of how to create those deep, groove heavy minimal tracks in the style of Sidney Charles. I'm going to leave some videos on screen shortly that I think you might enjoy next, so definitely check them out if you want to carry on learning, and I'll see you in the next one.